use captions today, you can click the CC button under more, the three dots of more at the bottom of your screen. And we also invite everyone to say their name before they speak to make sure that our words are attributed to us. So I want to ask again, does everybody have what they need to get started? Any access support that would be helpful right now? You can put it in the chat or otherwise let us know. All right, I see some thumbs up. Fantastic. Okay, I think we're good to move forward. We do have ASL and CART available today. The ASL interpreters will be spotlit. And like I said, you just have to click those three buttons to enable the captions. All right, so we're going to stop sharing the screen for just a minute. And I really want to get started by asking you all who you are and where you're from. So if you could briefly drop your name, organization if applicable, and where you're zooming in from in the chat, that would be great. It would be awesome to see the geographic diversity and type of folks that are here today. So name, org if applicable, and where you're zooming in from in the chat, please. That would be great. And while you all are doing that, like I said, we're going to be sharing a lot of resources today. So as we're talking through different parts of the poll access process, we're going to be dropping links to things in the chat. Those are documents, templates, questionnaires, and other tools that will help you do a poll access audit yourself. If you don't catch them all as they're coming through the chat during this workshop, don't worry, we're also going to send them out via email after the workshop. So, don't fret if it's moving too fast or if you don't get to click on them. And like I said, we're going to be hosting an optional 30-minute Q&A at the end if you want to stay and ask any more questions, specifically if they're nuanced questions to your situation. And so we're super excited you're here to learn about conducting accessibility audits in your community. Our hope is that at the conclusion of this workshop, you understand not only why audits are needed and how to plan for one, but how to actually conduct an audit with your organization in your community. So with that, I'm going to ask Shay to bring the slides back up, and I'm going to quickly walk us through the agenda for the next couple of hours. So we're going to spend a little bit of time just quickly reviewing the 2022 audit led by Detroit Disability Power and the Carter Center. We're going to talk about the scale and scope of planning an audit. We're going to talk about volunteer recruitment for the necessary roles of conducting an audit. We're going to talk about how to research your state's rules and procedures for observation. We're going to talk about how to get authorization to become an election observer. We're going to talk about volunteer training. We're going to review the questionnaire that we used in 2022 and that we recommend others using. We're going to talk about the various roles needed to do a thorough audit. We're going to talk about audit day procedures. We're going to talk about data analysis, and we're going to talk briefly about post-audit organizing. So like I said, it's going to be a wild ride, but I think we're all here for it. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Kenya to share out about the large audit that we conducted here in Detroit in 2022.
Thank you, Dessa. This is Kenya Flores. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Voting Access and Election Protection Fellow at Detroit Disability Power. I'm a Hispanic woman in her mid-20s. I have black hair and I'm wearing a black top with polka dots on it. And as Dessa said, I'm going to be sharing about our audit in 2022. So first, I'm going to talk about the need for audits. Although laws such as the Voting Rights Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Help America Vote Act outline minimum accessibility requirements, widespread inaccessibility remains a problem. DDP began conducting audits in 2018 after all of our board members had encountered access barriers at the polls. I'm sure many of you have unfortunately encountered barriers as well. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about our methodology. In 2022, we partnered with the Carter Center to conduct audits on a larger scale. DDP and TCC coordinated 261 audits on Election Day in 2022 in 15 cities in the 3 core counties of Metro Detroit, Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb. On election day, volunteer observers visited 98% of the polling places in the observation zone. The volunteers completed a questionnaire designed by DDP and TCC to evaluate the interior and exterior of each location based on legal accessibility requirements. Observers evaluated whether each polling location had an accessible parking area with a clear pathway into the building, an accessible entrance, fully functional voter assist terminal, VAT, which is what the accessible voting system is referred to in Michigan, and a seated height voting booth available to cast paper ballots privately and independently. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about our findings. Unfortunately, we found that only 16% of polling locations passed all four categories for accessibility. Although this is pretty awful, 67 polling places scored no on only one of the four accessibility measures. So if remedied, that would raise the number of fully accessible polling places to 42%, which isn't great, but is definitely better. Next, we're going to talk about the takeaways and recommendations. Unfortunately, this is not just a problem in Michigan. We know that it is a nationwide problem. The good news is that nearly all of these challenges are easily solvable and they can be fixed with little to no cost at all. Sites, next we're going to talk about a little bit about our recommendations again. So sites need to be thoroughly evaluated prior to being selected by someone with knowledge of ADA compliance, and a plan must be made to remedy any interior and exterior access barriers. This point of contact should be available to address any accessibility challenges on election day and during early voting. Clerks in each jurisdiction determine how prepared their poll workers are. Training should address poll worker understanding of accessibility accommodations, the proper placement and operation of accessible voting equipment, and the rights and responsibilities of poll challengers. Additionally, it should include a practice election to ensure that poll workers understand how to operate the accessible voting system in case any issues arise. So this is only a brief overview of the report. It's quite expansive, so I definitely encourage you to read the report, which we will put in the chat, and also watch the community briefing that we did back in the summer. I will now turn it over to Stephen to share about what planning and audit looks like.
Thank you, Kenya. Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Adelson. I use they and he pronouns, and I'm the program director at Civic Tennessee. I am a 30-year-old balding and beautiful white man with glasses, and today I'm wearing a blue long sleeve shirt. Now that you've heard a little about why audits are important and what was done in Detroit last year, let's dig into how you can do something similar in your community. So we can go to the next slide. The first thing you're going to want to do is honestly assess your goals and capacity. So on the slide, you can see here a number of key questions to reflect on at the beginning of your planning process. We're going to share these slides out afterwards, so don't feel like you have to write all of this down at the moment. So looking at the first set of goals, what is your overall objective and why are you doing this? Some other things you might want to think about as it relates to that is, do you know if there's a problem with access locally that you want to prove? Are you curious about the nature of the problem and want to get details? Do you plan to use the information gathered to organize and pressure election officials? Those are some things you might want to ask yourself. And second, how many staff and or volunteers do you have? Do you have a budget for this project? So some other things you'll want to keep in mind are some organizations choose to compensate their volunteers for their time, provide snacks, and or pay for gas. And do you know of any grants that may be available for this type of effort? The third thing you want to think about is how many polling sites do you plan to audit? And how big and spread out is the area that you plan to audit? Other things you'll want to think about are audits all have to happen when polls are open on election day. And knowing that each site takes about 15 minutes to audit, and then calculating driving time between sites will help you figure out how many observers you're going to need for your efforts. The fourth question you'll want to think about is, do you have the capacity to train people? And who on your team can do this training? And when is a good time to do it? And then finally, what are the rules in your state for election observation? And how will you get appropriate credentials to be able to conduct these audits as part of observation on election day? The state credential index will be shared with you so that you can aid in your efforts. And we can go to the next slide. Some other questions you'll want to think about are, what will you do with the data you collect in the audit? Do you know how to analyze the data? Who can help you to analyze that data? Are you going to publish a report with the data that you do collect and analyze? Are you going to use it to organize? Are you going to share it on with the media, social media, and otherwise? Some other questions. Do you have useful relationships with local election officials? And do you have any allies that can help you best release the data or introduce you to other election officials? And then finally, are there any organizations doing voting access and or election protection work in your community that may be interested in partnering with your organization to amplify or expand your work? We're going to put in the chat an audit preparedness reflection document so that you can start to think a little bit about what you need to plan for when it comes to an audit in your community and in your geography. Feel free to make a copy of it for yourself. But again, we're going to share things out with folks later on. So the second thing I'm going to talk about is volunteer recruitment. So thinking about the who, the what, and the how. I'm going to share some tips on how to think about staffing your audits. For many organizations, finding enough people to be there on the day to do this work can be one of the biggest barriers. So let's map it out. Building on what we covered in terms of planning your scale and scope, think about translating your goals into numbers. How many people do you need? For Detroit Disability Power back in 2022, each site visit took about 15 to 20 minutes. Like I said earlier, you'll also need to factor in drive time. You can divide sites up geographically when assigning them so that no volunteer has too much car time. You will want to consider aiming for a higher number than what you absolutely need in case people drop out before the day of, have an unexpected conflict, or in case people want to pair up for accessibility or support purposes. But your volunteers should know, even if they are driving and auditing alone, they are not alone. Everyone will be staying in communication with each other, and you'll have folks ready to respond to questions or concerns during election day and while auditing. Lastly, plan out what a shift looks like, how long, the time frames, and the number of shifts you need to cover your scope. When you're recruiting volunteers, it's also important to be thinking about what types of people you need. So we're thinking about volunteer qualities here. Your volunteers don't need to be experts since they will be doing training with you, but familiarity with disability is important. You'll also want people who can follow rules and who you can rely on to check in with you throughout the process. We can go to the next slide. So looking at election day itself and the roles of volunteers, there are two main roles that folks are going and doing the in-person work. You should also designate one or two team leads. These will be the folks coordinating the efforts and should have the ability to fill in and conduct audits if there are any sites that are uncovered or need to be covered at the last minute. The observers are the positions you'll need the most people to fulfill. You may choose to have folks go in teams, have people who just drive, or have individuals going out. The other thing to emphasize in recruitment is that there are multiple ways people can volunteer. You do not need to go in person as an observer to be helpful for conducting audits. It is really helpful to also have team members providing remote support. You should have at least 1 or 2 people designated here, but can have as many as you like. It is helpful to have someone monitoring responses as they come in and someone who can reach out to get clarification or help answer any questions or problems that access auditors encounter. Sarah is going to share a little bit more information about those roles later on today. And we can go to the next slide. People can also provide support after the audits by helping review the data, write reports and materials to share your findings with the public, or by being present at meetings to present results. Volunteers can also help you train more volunteers in the future. We can go to the next slide. Some recruitment tips for y'all. Start early by building awareness about polling place access issues and share how this impacts disabled voter turnout. To find volunteers, reach out to local disability or civic organizations. Since you'll be starting early, make sure to keep track of interested volunteers and stay engaged with them via weekly or bi-weekly emails so you don't lose touch. And we can go to the final slide for me. When you're advertising and asking for volunteers, be specific about what the role is about, what it requires, and who you're looking for. This will help people have a good sense of what they can and can't do, assess their access needs in order to be able to support, and it will help you get volunteers who are a good fit. You should also think about ways to incentivize and thank your volunteers. It could be as simple as having a small pizza party or social gathering after the audits to debrief and celebrate. At the very least, make sure to send thank you emails to everyone. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to keep our training going.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Blahovic. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. I'm wearing glasses and a pink shirt, and my room behind me is blurry. I am a U.S. voting rights expert for the Carter Center's Democracy Program, and I'm going to be talking about seeking authorization and volunteer training. So we can go to the next slide. Every state has different rules and restrictions around polling place observation. And the first step to being able to plan a polling place accessibility audit is to learn about your state's rules and procedures. The National Conference of State Legislatures has a state-by-state resource listing the qualifications, the accreditation processes, and the restrictions on what observers can observe. Though authorization will allow you to conduct a more comprehensive audit, authorization is not necessary for quickly observing the exterior of a polling place. It is more related to being able to go inside of the polling place. Additionally, partnering with a protection and advocacy organization in your state will allow you to access the interior of the polling site that you may not otherwise be able to procure. Protection and advocacy agencies, many of them are already conducting accessibility audits under the Protection and Advocacy for Voting Access program, which is a federally funded program. We also have a credential index that has the credential process for observation in states. The National Conference of State Legislatures, as I said, also has a list of policies for election observers. We are going to talk about some of the things you need to consider when reviewing election laws. So is nonpartisan observation allowed in your state? If so, what are observers called? Are they called poll challengers, poll watchers, etc.? What part of the voting process may be observed? Rules vary from not allowing nonpartisan observations to not explicitly being permitted, but being accepted on a case-by-case basis to allowing observation of the full process. Access to polling places may vary. Some states allow full observations, while others may allow partial observation, where the observers are kind of confined to one area. In states where observation is not allowed in the polling place at all, an audit can still be done of the exterior of the polling place. What are the requirements for observation? Some states may require a state-based nonpartisan civic organization to coordinate. Some may require that an observer be a resident or a registered voter in that state, while other states do not have those requirements. How do you seek authorization to observe a polling place? What's the process, requirements, and timeline? We can go to the next slide. The process for seeking authorization for observation varies greatly by jurisdiction, so make sure that you are following the election laws process and timeline for seeking authorization early to receive permission and resolve any issues. We recommend starting the planning process at least 3 months prior to the date of the observation. As discussed on the previous slide, you must start by researching the state's rules and procedures. Once you're familiar with those, determine what the deadlines are for preparing and submitting your authorization request. Consider the length of the review period and the deadlines that the jurisdiction will need to consider the request. In Michigan in 2022, the request to observe, well, in Michigan in general, but what we did in 2022, the request to observe can be sent during a 10-day window between 20 and 30 days prior to the election. So there's a very specific time frame that we could make this request. Also consider the amount of time that you will need to prepare the request before any window opens. You'll then need to gather the contact information for the jurisdiction or jurisdictions you will be contacting. In Michigan, our requests had to be prepared, notarized, and sent to each election clerk. We created an authorization status tracking sheet to stay organized and on top of deadlines and responses. Then you must prepare and send the requests. So with regard to the information to include in the request, the requirements also vary by state, what a state requires for you to submit an authorization request. So again, be sure to research your state's specific rules and procedures before you begin preparing it. Gather all the required information. In Michigan, our authorization request included a statement of intent to deploy poll challengers, a statement on why we were eligible under Michigan law to deploy poll challengers, and a copy of our credentials to be used on election day, and a notarized signature of the head of the organization making the request. We have an example of this request included in the appendix of our methodology, which will be put in the chat. And I want to make a quick note here. We're talking about poll challengers. That is what we had to seek authorization for in Michigan. There are also poll watchers, but poll watchers were confined to a very specific area in the polling place, so they could not look and get full access to the polling place. So we had to specifically seek authorization for poll challengers. Poll watchers still can do very important work and get a partial audit, but this gave us access for a full audit. As you plan your observation, remember that local election officials are often operating in a strained environment with few resources and a busy schedule. To make the process easier for your organization and for election officials who are reviewing your request, consider including additional information that will help them. This can include information like other localities you'll be contacting, other jurisdictions, how many volunteers are expected at the polling place, the time of day the volunteers are expected to be observing, and the names of the observers. In 2022, we did not have all of this information at the time. And so it's not something that is a requirement in our case, but it's something that could help to evaluate the request further. This information may be particularly useful if it's provided prior to the date of their poll worker training, as then election officials can prepare poll workers for the presence of observers in the polling place. Okay, next slide. Now onto training volunteers. We can go to the next slide. So why have a training before audit day? There are a few reasons. You can prepare observers for the audit day process. Make sure that observers know the rules that they need to follow in the polling place. Make sure that they know how to fill out the audit questionnaire and that they have all of the same background for understanding what the questions are asking, how to interpret them, how to observe accessibility in the polling place, and how to answer the questions. And then you want to make sure that observers know who to contact if they have questions or concerns on election day. Next slide. Your training should span a good 60 to 90 minutes and include introducing and walking through the audit questionnaire so that observers are trained on what each question is asking, how to observe, and how to answer those questions. When you train your volunteers, your training should cover each of the questions, what it is asking, how to assess the polling place, and each of the possible answers. In the next section, we will give an overview of the audit questionnaire and the instruction manual handout, which thoroughly describes each question and answer. It should also include rules and conduct for observers, logistics for audit day, including when and where to show up, how you will assign them to their territory, what to bring with them, and how to stay in contact on audit day. It should also include time for observers to ask questions about audit day so that they are clear on their roles, responsibilities in the rules, and they can ask any clarifying questions that they have. We have created an observer training guide. Actually, hold on, go back a slide. Sorry. Yeah, so we have created an observer training guide that will give you the information you need to create your own training for your volunteers. You'll need to edit this document based on your state's procedures and parts of the election process that you're auditing. So there's information in there for a full audit, but if you're only doing the exterior of the polling place, you can take out the information that is related to the interior. Now we can go on to the next slide on observer conduct. Observers must behave appropriately in the polling place, follow all of the rules and laws, and be respectful of poll workers and voters. While a code of conduct isn't required, we highly recommend having one so that observers should sign and closely follow. A code of conduct sample that we used in Michigan is available in the appendix of the methodology. So we'll put that in the chat again. Observers should be informed by attending observer training prior to audit day so they know how to fill out the audit questionnaire and what they must do on election day. They need to be objective by impartially observing and reporting on what they see and hear. They need to be respectful of the election process. They should not interfere with the work of the poll workers or voters. They need to be politically neutral. They must refrain from wearing clothing with political slogans or making political statements. This is a nonpartisan observation. And so there are legal restrictions around partisanship in the polling place that fall under electioneering laws. And they should be closely following the rules and guidance of the organizers. These rules exist so that observers do not get in trouble at the polling place or even worse, get in trouble with the law. Next slide. Important conduct considerations. In addition to the code of conduct and the conduct we covered on the last slide, they should follow these important rules as they conduct the observation. This will ensure that they're behaving appropriately and won't get into any trouble. An observer should not talk to a voter under any circumstances. If they are approached by a voter and that they're asked to speak to them, they should maybe seek out the head poll worker and maybe have them talk to the voter, but they should not be speaking to the voter themselves. Again, should not be wearing any clothing with political slogans. They are banned in the polling places and considered electioneering. If they are approached by the media, they should say no comment and not discuss it further. They should also reach out to their team lead and let them know that they were approached. In some cases, what we did in Michigan, we did not have the issue with being approached by media, but we coached our folks, our observers, to let them know if there was a point of contact, if the media had questions on our team. Again, not something that came up, but something to be prepared for. In the polling place, observers should only speak to the polling place chairperson if at all possible. If they aren't sure who the polling place chairperson is, they can ask a poll worker who the chairperson is and say that they would like to speak with them. Safety is a priority. Even though we have questions in the observation questionnaire about voter intimidation, if there are any safety issues, observers should immediately leave the polling place. If the environment feels hostile or dangerous in any way, they should immediately reach out to their team lead and inform them of the situation. If they're denied access to the polling place for some reason, even if they have proper credentials, they should first ask to speak to the chairperson. If the chairperson denies them entry, they should leave and reach out to the team lead and inform them of the situation. Although it is a stressful situation, and it did happen to one of our observers in 2022, our observer and all observers should remain calm and just inform their team leaders so that they can handle the situation. And now I'm going to hand it over to Kenya, who will be covering the audit questionnaire. Oh, I did see a question in the chat. We will be holding questions to the end, so we will make sure to address.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. This is Kenya again. So we've been referring to the audit questionnaire, and so you're probably wondering, what is the audit questionnaire? So the audit questionnaire is a list of questions that observers will complete at each polling location to assess the accessibility of the polling place. The audit questionnaire is available in a Google form. Observers will fill out the questionnaire on their phone at the polling place and submit it. Ideally, your team will have someone reviewing the data that observers submit in real time so that you can clarify any confusing or unclear information in real time. Here's the Google form that we recommend making a copy um, of the questionnaire. Feel free to make a copy and then tweak as you need, since you may or may not be able to assess all of the questions that we have included, as Sarah has mentioned. Some observers may request to fill out the questionnaire in paper format, and then that information will have to be input into the form after the observation. The full questionnaire is 23 questions and is broken down into several sections. However, depending on your state's observation, you may have to edit the questionnaire for the questions your observers are able to answer. For example, in states where observation is not allowed in the polling place, you will delete questions inside the polling place. The questionnaire has questions in 6 categories. Most questions require the observer to select the most appropriate answer. However, there are opportunities for observers to write in additional context. Over the next few slides, we will give you a broad overview of what those questions assess. However, we will not have the opportunity to go into great detail on each section. For a thorough understanding of what each question is asking, you should look at the instruction manual, which has a thorough description of each question and its possible answers. We will now give an overview of each section. So next we're going to go into the first section, which is the arrival. In this section, the observer will enter their name, their phone number, the time of arrival, and the name of the polling place. They should also verify that the name, address, and precincts that were listed on their turf list are accurate. If not, detail what was not correct about the information in their turf list. The next section is about the accessible parking and pathway. The observer will start their observation with the questions on accessible parking and pathway. In the accessible parking question, they will observe whether there is a clearly marked accessible parking spot either in a parking lot or street parking. They will then observe the pathway from the parking to the entrance of the voting area. They should look for obstacles like stairs without a ramp, broken sidewalks, low-hanging branches, or other obstacles that will get in the way of wheelchair users, people with mobility devices, or someone who is blind or has low vision. The next few questions are about the accessible entrance and interior. They will observe whether the accessible entrance is the main entrance to the voting area or whether the voters with physical disabilities are required to use a separate accessible entrance. If the main entrance to the voting area is accessible, it does not require signage marking it as accessible. That is only required if it is a separate entrance. They will then assess the accessibility of the door to the polling place and how it opens. Observers should also note whether the doorway is propped open with big objects such as trash cans, which would make it impossible for a wheelchair user to get through the door. There are opportunities for observers to enter additional context on what they observe, especially if they observe an access barrier. This can provide important information when doing data analysis to understand exactly what the access barriers were at each polling location. Once the observer has entered the polling place and introduced themselves to the chairperson, they will observe whether the path to the voting area was easy to navigate, just like they did with the path outside of the polling place. So the next questions are about the accessible voting systems. In jurisdictions that allow observers to fully examine the voting area, the next section focuses on the accessible voting systems. Observers will observe whether there is an accessible voting system that is set up at wheelchair height, powered on, and ready for use by voters. This is very important as for years, disabled voters around the country have reported going to polling places where the accessible voting system is not set up and ready for use, and having to sometimes wait for several hours to use the accessible voting system. Observers will note whether there is an accessible controller and headphones that are attached and ready for use. They will then also observe whether the accessible voting system is placed so that the voter can vote privately. In many cases, we observed situations where the accessible voting machine was not set up for privacy, where poll workers and other voters could easily see the screen as voters marked their choices on the accessible voting system. The next section are the questions on the accessible seated height voting booths. So most jurisdictions have options to mark paper ballots by hand, and only a few have all voters vote on accessible voting machines. In these jurisdictions, observers will need to assess whether there is a wheelchair height voting booth for voters with disabilities who want to hand mark a paper ballot. Just like with the accessible voting system, they should assess whether the voting station is placed in a way that allows voters with disabilities to vote privately. The next section are the questions on voter intimidation and wrapping up. There are 3 more questions throughout the questionnaire that assess whether the observers noted any voter intimidation tactics. 2 outside of the polling place and 1 inside. Outside of the polling place, observers will note whether they saw any pressuring or intimidating of voters. This would mean campaigns or others that are improperly intimidating or pressuring voters, leaving their assigned spots or otherwise being inappropriate. This does not include campaigns that are legally and appropriately providing information to voters. Observers will also note whether anyone was blocking access or acting violently. Remember, if a situation at a polling location feels violent or dangerous, observers should leave the situation immediately and inform their team leaders. Inside the polling place, observers will note whether they saw anyone interfering with the work of the poll workers or being otherwise disruptive. Finally, observers will note the time they conclude the observation and then submit the questionnaire before moving on to the next polling place. That is an overview of our questionnaire, and I will now turn it over to Gabrielle to discuss the roles and responsibilities of volunteers on audit day.
Sorry. Thank you, Kenya. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabrielle. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior policy manager with State Voices. I'm a Latina woman in my early 30s with long brown hair, and I'm wearing a gray sweater. Can go to the next slide. On election day, each participant in the observation should know their roles and responsibilities. Here, we've broken the team down into a few roles: the team leaders, the observers, and two back-end support roles looking at data and communications. However, these roles may overlap, as we will discuss in the next few slides. In the case of our 2022 Michigan observation, we had 21 observers, our team leaders who were available to troubleshoot issues and provide last-minute coverage of a few sites that our observers had missed, and one person reviewing the back end and communicating with both observers and the team leaders. Next. The team leaders are the organizers of the observation. As leaders, you are the ones who are coordinating the logistics, training the observers, and making sure that everything is ready to go on audit day. To make this work smoothly, you should create and distribute an observation packet after you train your observers before audit day. The observer packet should include the following: the observer's credentials, the observer's territory, which is the list of polling places they are assigned to observe, the link to the questionnaire, the phone numbers they may need to stay in contact with your team. We've created an audit resource guide as a handout where you can include this information. On the first page, you can fill in the blanks with important information for each observer, like their start time, their first location, the questionnaire link, and important phone numbers. The resource guide also gives observers tips on what they should bring and reminders on who they can and can't talk to at the polling place. It also includes a cheat sheet with reminders about the audit questions and graphics reminding them what to look for. On audit day, team leaders should be available to answer questions from observers and troubleshoot major issues. Leaders may play many roles on audit day. In Michigan, our leaders checked in with observers, answered logistical and technical questions from those observers, and helped observers find the entrance to a polling place when the location was moved. And they even went to observe a few polling places at the last minute when a logistical mix-up led to our observers missing a few polling places. They should remain flexible, communicative, and able to support their team throughout audit day. On audit day, observers should come prepared with their observation packet and a fully charged cell phone. They will arrive at their first polling place at the dedicated start time and then check in with their team leaders or communications team to let them know that they've arrived. Checking in is important so that the team can know that everyone has shown up and is ready to go. During the observation, they should communicate any questions they may have to their point of contact, whether that is the team leader or another volunteer who is answering the phones. Some scenarios where this may be necessary include if they're unsure how to answer a question about the polling place. An example of this is if an observer is unsure whether the path to the building is accessible because there is a ramp, but the ramp has cracked pavement and doesn't seem navigable. If they're unsure how to answer this, they can call their communications team for help. If a person is reviewing the data and has a question about one of their answers, and if they are denied entry into the polling place or see a hostile or dangerous situation. In these situations, they should remove themselves from the situation and alert their team leaders. Once they reach the end of their turf list, observers should check in and let the team know that they've completed their list. If your team has additional polling places to audit, there's still time left to observe, and the observer wants to continue, you can send them another list. We had this happen to several observers in 2022. Otherwise, you can thank them for their time and let them know of any next steps that you have planned, such as a debrief. For an audit where observers have full access to the polling place, they will move through the observation in this way. First, they will arrive at the polling place and check in with their team leader. Then they will begin their observation of the first polling place by answering questions about accessibility, or excuse me, about accessible parking and the entrance to the building. Once they've completed their observation outside of the building, they will then go into the polling place and find the precinct chairperson and introduce themselves. They will then answer the observation questions about the interior pathway, accessible voting system, and wheelchair height voting booths. If they have time, they may observe a few minutes to see that everything is running smoothly. Once they've completed their observation inside, they will then thank the chairperson and leave. Back outside the polling place, they can submit their report, and they will head to their next polling place on their list. The data and support team can be structured in different ways. If you can have everyone on the data and support team combing through data and communicating with observers, or you can have them divide into separate roles to make it for a smoother workflow. Determine what works best for your team based on the number of volunteers you have and what will work best for your setup. On this page, on this slide rather, we will divide the work of this team into two groups: data entry, monitoring, and communication. For data entry, the data and support team should be familiar with the observation questionnaire measures and polling place accessibility. They can review the questionnaire to see if there's any inconsistencies. For example, if an observer says in one question that there's no wheelchair access entrance, but then continues to mark another question as having a wheelchair accessible entrance, then they would need to follow up with the observer to clarify whether there's an accessible entrance. Observers can add additional written context throughout the audit, and sometimes they can indicate what they weren't sure how to answer on a particular question. The data team can look through these answers as they come in and flag any comments that need follow-up to clarify. Once an answer is flagged for follow-up, the communications point of contact can follow up with the observer to resolve that issue. Alternatively, the communications team can act as a first point of contact for observers as they check in at the beginning of the day and check out at the end of the day, answer questions or texts from observers who have any, answer calls or texts from observers who have any questions. They can help with questions that they can easily answer, or they can escalate higher level issues such as complex questions or being denied access to a polling place to team leaders. Call observers to follow up for any inconsistencies, flagged in data analysis, and clarify any issues. I'll now pass it over to Sarah C. to share a bit more about data analysis.
Great. I'm Sarah Cooper. I am a white woman in my mid-30s with medium-length brown hair, which is pulled back, and blue glasses. I'm also a consultant with the Carter Center, coordinating their nonpartisan election observation work across the United States. And at the moment, I'm wearing a blue polka-dotted suit jacket and a white top. I will be giving an overview of the data collection and analysis process. By now, you have all received the outline of the questionnaire and the key areas we are evaluating for the audit. The tool that we have used in the past to collect data and think works well is called Google Forms. The checklist is programmed into Google Forms, and volunteers can then use their mobile phone to complete the checklist. On the right side of this slide, there's a screenshot of the Google form, which shows the first two questions that volunteers will be asked to answer: their time of arrival to their designated polling location and their name. This helps to visualize what the volunteers will be seeing on their phones. Most, if not all of the questions in the form have an asterisk, denoting that they require an answer. As mentioned before, there are free text options for most of the questions where they can add additional comments, and I encourage you to train your volunteers to use that free text to note any details that cannot be captured with a simple yes or no question. A useful feature of Google Forms is that observer responses can be viewed in real time. So as mentioned earlier, it is a good idea to designate one person from the data and support team to monitor the responses and to be identifying any issues that may arise. So what do you do with the Google form after the audit? For those who might be unfamiliar with surveys and the use of Google Forms, one great advantage of this tool is that it allows you to generate summaries of responses just by selecting View Responses, and that can be done by anyone in your organization who has admin access to the form. This is useful because it can quickly let you know how many responded and how many answered yes or no to each question. Google Forms also produces visuals like pie charts that you can copy and paste into other documents. We have also provided a data analysis template and instruction guide that is configured to work if you use the audit questionnaire from the toolkit. All you will need to do in this case is to paste your collected data into the template, and it will automatically generate summary statistics for you, as well as a measure of overall polling place accessibility on a score of 0 to 13. Accordingly, the template is divided into 3 distinct tabs. The first tab is called Form Response, paste data here. In the provided template, this tab contains some sample data that can be deleted and replaced with your project data. The second tab is called Question Analyses. Based on the information that you paste into the Form Responses tab, it will generate summary statistics for each question on the audit questionnaire. This means that it will tell you how many observers answered the question, how many of them selected each of the responses to each question, and what percentage of the total responses to that question this was. So for example, this tab might tell you that 10 observers answered question 7, that 6 responded yes and 4 responded no, and that this means that 60% of respondents to question 7 answered yes, while 40% of respondents to question 7 answered no. The third tab is called Overall Score 0 to 13. The audit questionnaire includes 13 different questions about polling place accessibility, each of which can be thought of as a unique metric of accessibility. As a side note, the questionnaire also includes some questions about the voter experience, for example, questions about violence and intimidation at the voting location. These are not included in this overall score because they are not measures of accessibility, although they do provide useful information about the voter experience. Using the data that you paste into the Form Responses tab, this tab will translate each of the responses into numerical scores that can be added up to determine an overall accessibility score for the location. A score of 0 would mean that the location was not accessible on any of the metrics assessed, while a score of 13 would mean that the location was fully accessible on all metrics assessed. There are a few caveats about how to use this template. First one, it is currently configured to accept a maximum of 299 responses. If you plan to collect information about more than 299 locations, you would need to work with a data manager to adjust the formulas on the question analyses and overall score tabs. Second, the template will only work if you use the version of the audit questionnaire that is included in the toolkit. If you want to make any changes to the order or the wording of the template, you would again need to work with the data manager to update the template to reflect the version that your organization will be using. National or local coalition partners could be a great resource here. We are also happy to help if you reach out to us, although we would need some lead time to respond. Here is the full template to help your team produce the summary statistics for each question and the scores. To use the template, first open it, then you will click on File, then make a copy to save the template to your workspace. You can then retitle the template with a name that makes sense to you. You will next need to delete the sample data in the tab Form Responses Paste Data here, and you can do that by highlighting columns A through AO and rows 2 through 5, then pressing the Delete key. Do not delete the column titles contained in row 1. Finally, paste your own data into the tab Form Responses Paste Data here. Highlight all cells in your own response sheet, then right-click on cell A2 in the Form Response 1 Paste Data Here tab of the template and select Paste. We recommend that you initially paste the data headers from your data set into the template as well, so that you can make sure that the columns in your data set line up with the columns in the template. For example, you will want to make sure that your responses to question 6, where there are clearly marked accessible parking spaces, are in column H, which is the column where the template expects this information to appear. Once you have verified that all of your pasted data appears in the expected column, you can delete the headers, which should be in row 2. And you don't need to remember this. We've included it all on the slide, so you can go back and consult. The next tab is the Question Analyses tab that will generate summary statistics for questions 6 through 21 from the Toolkit questionnaire. Questions 1 through 5 include information about the observer's name, phone number, the location name, etc., that would not lend themselves to this kind of analysis. This tab includes 3 rows of questions and 6 columns of questions. So you'll need to scroll up and down as well as to the left and right to be able to see all of the summary statistics that were generated. This tab relies on 3 basic formulas to pull the information from the Form Responses tab and analyze it. You do not need to understand these formulas, but I'm including a brief summary for those of you who are interested in data, and this may also be useful background if you are working with a data manager to modify the template for your organization's customized needs. The first formula is a count-if formula that counts all cells in a given column that are not blank, and then subtracts 1 since the column header is also a non-blank response. This formula will tell you how many observers answered each question. The second formula is again a count-if formula, but this time one that counts the number of times that a particular string of text appears in a column. This is just a fancy way of saying that it is counting unique words or phrases. So for example, we could count the number of times that the phrase "no wheelchair accessible entrance" appears in column L of the Form Responses tab to determine how many observers selected that answer in response to question 8. Was the wheelchair accessible entrance to the voting area the main entrance for all voters, or was there a separate wheelchair accessible entrance? The third formula is a simple division formula to transform the number of observers who provided each response to a given question into a percentage of the total responses received to that question. The third tab that we've provided will generate 4 submetrics or subscores of accessibility for each voting location based on the responses received. And we've called these submetrics M1, accessible parking and pathway, M2, accessible entrance, M3, accessible voting systems, and M4, accessible voting booth. This tab also calculates a metric M5, the overall accessibility score, which is obtained by adding M1, M2, M3, and M4 together. The maximum possible accessibility score for a voting location is 13, meaning that it was fully accessible. The minimum possible score for a voting location is 0, meaning that it was not accessible on any of the metrics assessed. This tab is coded to automatically transform the responses from the audit questionnaire as pasted into the Form Responses tab into numerical values that can be added up to create the accessibility metrics or subscores, which are then added together to generate the overall accessibility score. The formulas to carry out this transformation are included in hidden columns on either side of the question in the tab. You can unhide and examine these formulas if you want, but it is not necessary for the analysis. As an example, the score for M1 pathway and parking and pathway is generated by adding together the scores that each voting location received based on question 6 about accessible parking spaces, question 7 about an accessible path from the parking space to the entrance of the voting location, and question 14, clear pathway through the voting location. For each of these questions, if the observer noted that the voting location was accessible, it would receive a score of 1. If the observer noted that the location was not accessible, it would receive a score of 0. And if no response was provided to a question, the cell would be blank. 2 questions, question 8 and 14, assign partial points to voting locations based on the particular response. For question 8, was the wheelchair accessible entrance to the voting area the main entrance, or was there a separate entrance? A location where the main entrance for all voters was wheelchair accessible will receive a score of 1. A separate wheelchair accessible entrance will receive a score of 0.5, and no wheelchair accessible entrance will receive a score of 0. For question 15, was the accessible voting system available to you? Select all but apply. It will assign a score of 0.3 for each of the 3 responses picked. and a score of 1 if the observer selected all of the above. And again, this is included in the guide that we've prepared about this, so there's no need to remember all of this now. A few last things that I would note that will help you with the data analysis. First, I encourage you to spend time looking at the free text responses. These can uncover some important nuances in how the observers experience their observation mission, and we want it to capture that. This is also a good way to identify ways to improve the checklist, especially since it could be used across different states and jurisdictions. In addition, some of the questions on the audit questionnaire require observers to provide additional information based on their response. For example, if the observer responds yes to question 12, was anyone pressuring or intimidating voters in the area around the polling place, they're asked to provide more information. However, some observers may neglect to do so or may find it challenging to provide long text-based responses while also trying to observe. In such a situation, a discussion with the observer can help you to gather more information. It is also important to review your data for consistency of responses across questions and to call back any observers who report information that may be contradictory or unclear. For example, questions 19 and 20 both give observers the option to select that no wheelchair height voting booth was present. If the observer marks no wheelchair height voting booth to one of these questions, but selects a different response that describes the wheelchair height voting booth in another question, it would be good to confirm both responses. It could be the case that the observer mistakenly selected the wrong response to one question, or there may be another issue at play. For example, a poll worker provided a wheelchair height voting booth after seeing that an observer was present and assessing for this issue. Finally, consider additional information that will be useful in understanding the data better. If you are doing observations in different jurisdictions within your state, it may make sense to add a jurisdiction question like county or municipality in Google Forms, or you could add it at the stage of data cleaning and management. Since you will have the list of locations in cities or counties at the ready, adding the name of the jurisdiction as an additional column to your spreadsheet should not be too complicated. One important piece of information that we used in Michigan was the type of polling location. That way we could evaluate which types of buildings presented more barriers for voters with disabilities. We're always available to provide more guidance on data collection, cleaning, and management, as well as analysis. So thank you for your patience with this. And I will now turn over to Gabrielle to share about what post-audit organizing looks like.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi again, everyone. I'm Gabrielle, and now that we've done all this work to audit the polling places and analyze the data, what now? Data is powerful, but only if you use it. First, you'll want to compile a full report with all your detailed findings, the scores of each site, and the barriers and context behind those scores. This full report should be shared publicly, but especially sent to election officials in your area and other advocates. However, not everyone has time to read a full 30+ page report, so you'll want to also create a one-pager summarizing the key outcomes and statistics. Pull from common themes, and most importantly, highlight calls to action. It is also useful to keep a personal element to the data, both in your report and your sharing of it. Remind officials that these are barriers that are not just hypothetical, but they are real obstacles preventing disabled voters from accessing their right. Consider including quotes or stories from voters with disabilities about their experiences. The next step is to start sharing those materials with your local election officials to work towards systemic change. It's important to remember that even if you're feeling frustrated with these results, the election officials are the folks that you will need to work with to make these changes. So try to emphasize that you're on the same team. Try to build positive relationships and show that having done this work is not just a criticism on them, but is also to help them better engage the community. Remember that in addition to meetings, you can also use media like op-eds, letters to the editor, or even traditional coverage and social media to help spread the message. Public pressure and interest can help lead to change. And don't forget to credit and thank your volunteers. I'll now pass it over to Dessa to close us out.
Thanks so much, Gabrielle. This is Dessa. Thank you all for going through so much information today. I know we covered a lot. Appreciate all of you participants joining us and your commitment to full accessibility. In the evaluation, there is a question about what you might want to dig into more. And we're also looking for feedback to make this training better. So if there's areas of today's conversation that you'd like additional training on, please note that in the evaluation, and we will do our best to make sure to provide materials and or additional training. I'm going to put the link to the evaluation in the chat right now. If you don't mind taking just a minute to fill that out sooner rather than later would be ideal. And as promised, we're going to send out an email with all of the links and resources mentioned in today's workshop. We're also going to stay on for the next half an hour to answer any questions and to dig in further on details that people are interested in talking more about. So if you're leaving, that's totally fine. Have a nice rest of your day. You'll get a follow-up email from us. Don't be a stranger. You know, we want to know if you're doing these poll access audits. We're really looking to have people all over the country do these in 2024 and really seeing organizing happening to make sure that polls are more accessible across the country. So if you're doing an audit, stay in touch with us and let us know. Best of luck with your organizing. And for those of you who want to stay on, we're going to transition in just a moment to doing a more kind of informal question and answer. So thank you very much. You have to go. For those who want to stay for Q&A, maybe all of our panelists can spotlight themselves for a moment. And what we'll do is you all can put questions in the chat, or you can come off mute and briefly ask your question, and I will kind of moderate by handing questions over to our various facilitators today. We all have slightly different areas of expertise and can answer different questions.
This is Sarah. I do want to go back. We did get a question earlier on can the observers talk to voters outside of the electioneering zone if they are approached, especially if there was an accessibility issue?
Do our other panelists want to spotlight themselves so that we can see each other? Okay. Sarah, do you want to answer that question, or do you want to pass it to someone?
I would like to know, Sarah Cooper, if you have any thoughts on this. This is an interesting one.
So would you mind just repeating the question quickly, Sarah B?
Yes. Oh, the question is, can observers talk to voters outside of the electioneering zone if they are approached, especially if there was an accessibility issue?
So I think certainly I would not recommend observers to approach voters the other way around. And that's because if we want to make sure that we kind of maintain access for this type of work and make very clear that it's nonpartisan, it's not intended to influence the process. That said, if a voter approaches the observer and has questions about what you are there to do, or if they want to raise an issue for you, I think it would be fine for the observer to interact with the voter. Certainly don't promise to fix the issue for the voter, but you could explain, the name of your organization, what you're there to observe, and take note of what they tell you potentially, but I would make very clear on the forum that this is something you're hearing about secondhand, not necessarily something that you as the observer witnessed yourself. Yeah, I think those would be my general recommendations there.
Yeah, this is Dessa. Thank you, Sarah. Do other people have questions? All right, there's one in the chat from Shannon. She says, I think you already answered this, but I'm going to ask for clarification. Oftentimes, election protection groups that have other types of rules like challenges or monitors have accessibility questions on their reporting surveys too. What are your recommendations on how to properly incorporate that, since the rules may be different? And because it's nearly impossible to have volunteers everywhere, or can they be a combination of another nonpartisan election protection role and a credentialed accessibility audit volunteer? Anybody want to take this question? I see Sarah B smiling. I can also jump in if you want.
Why don't you start? I'm still thinking on it.
Yeah, this is Dessa. Shannon, this is a great question. And actually, this is something Kenya and I were just talking about the other day. Oh, Stephen, great. Jump in, Stephen. We'll go after you.
Oh, okay. So we're doing this in Tennessee right now, so I think it's a great example where we have a lot of nonpartisan poll observers that are placed at polling locations throughout the state. And while in the past they haven't necessarily done accessibility surveying as part of their role, it's been a really natural integration as part of as part of one of their check-ins throughout the day. So we've identified that one of their midday check-ins, in addition to their normal reporting of any issues that might have been coming up at the polling place throughout the day, that they also conduct a full audit. Since they're already present for the full day, our poll observers don't roam to different locations. They're at one stationary polling place for the full from open to close. And so it allows them to do the survey without any additional time requirements. So for us, it's a huge benefit to be able to lean on other observing roles where it's permissible. Like in Tennessee, it's not an issue that we're facing. Um, I know that there might be some concerns in other states, depending on roles, responsibilities, what's legal, what's not. But I know at least there's an example in us where poll observers can also take on that auditing responsibility, which allows us to cover more polling locations, which is wonderful.
Thanks, Stephen. I think Gabrielle wants to weigh in as well.
Yeah, I think Stephen provided a wonderful example. And just from an election protection perspective, I can add that this can really supplement a potential program. So you either can combine with an existing type of volunteer. So for example, not to give away their brainstorming, but I know in Florida they have a set of volunteers that have a specific set of skills, but oftentimes it means that they are only needed when a rapid response is required, but they otherwise have a wonderful pool of volunteers to use. So they've decided to combine auditing with that volunteer pool. So they have a set role, maybe at the end of each day or at the beginning of each day, and then they can be available ad hoc, as they had historically been. This also just another opportunity to expand your election protection program to reflect different needs and different volunteer types. Some folks really love a checklist like opportunity, where some folks love to interact with voters, and those can mean two different things, whether that's a traditional poll monitor or an access auditor. So just throwing that out there as well.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Does anyone have anything else to add? And Shannon, did your question get answered?
This is Sarah B. One thing I can say, not for election protection so much, but the Carter Center has done other types of nonpartisan election observation. In Georgia, I know I did not see the survey that they used, but in Georgia in 2022, they incorporated this information, these questions into their nonpartisan election observation, where it wasn't roaming like observers like we had in Michigan, where people were there for 10 to 15 minutes, but they were there for the entire day of observing setup, voting day, and breaking down voting afterwards. So it can also be incorporated into other types of election observation. The one thing I would say is, if it is something where accessibility wasn't the initial purpose, still make sure that folks are trained on how to interpret these questions, because yes, adding in accessibility questions is of course good, but you need to still make sure that the observers know what they are observing and how to do it. So make sure that you're also incorporating it into training.
Could I add on to that response? This is Sarah Cooper. Completely agree with everything that Sarah Blahovic just said. I would also say, I think it's important, if you're trying to integrate questions on accessibility, and that's not something that your organization typically works on, which is certainly true for the Carter Center, that you need to be coordinating with organizations that do have that background to determine what the appropriate metrics and questions are. Because otherwise I think you're apt to get a lot of individuals who just say, oh yeah, of course this is accessible, and not really understand what that means or how to unpack it.
That is certainly true. I think, as person with a disability who uses a wheelchair, I see it go in both directions. Sometimes people are like, oh yeah, of course it's accessible. There's only one stair. Or of course it's accessible, but then there's no accessible bathroom or something like that, because people don't understand what accessibility means. One thing that's kind of interesting is in 2022, we actually saw people kind of swing too far the other direction in some of the observation. So, for example, somebody thought of a sidewalk as impassable because it had a very small crack in it. And it would have been totally fine to go over in a wheelchair. And so this is going back to the point about the importance of training, and to your point also, like having relationships with disability organizations that can really have the nitty-gritty conversation and help people understand like what is and is not truly accessible. Stephen in the chat said, our pool observers who are opting to also do accessibility surveying receive the required survey training, just echoing everything that Sarah B mentioned. Wonderful, thank you. Are there additional questions from participants? Anything that's on your mind if you're thinking about doing an access audit? As you can tell from everything we've spoken about today, it's um, it is somehow simultaneously like a pretty straightforward process and also fairly complicated. Having done it, I can say it feels that way. It feels both straightforward and complicated, but it's definitely worth learning how to do. It's, if you have the right team and you give yourself enough time, it's not the most stressful thing in the world. It's actually a really great opportunity to learn about your community and what disabled voters are navigating when they go to vote. It's a good opportunity to build relationships with coalition partners and election officials. And ultimately, the goal is to make positive change and increase how accessible polling locations are. So we know that across the country, the accessibility of polling locations is in the teens. That is highly unacceptable. And so we have a lot of work to do together. And that's exactly why we're doing workshops like this. We want to train more and more people to be able to do this. And I know that Stephen wants to add something too.
I had a question actually. I know from my previous uh, accessibility surveying in Tennessee, I've had a lot of poll workers, including those that are polling place coordinators. When I introduced myself to let them know why I'm here, they're really interested and excited. And before I leave, sometimes they ask how the survey went. Is there anything that would be good for me to know about? Because I'd love to correct things in real time, which I thought was really great. And so I've had some of those conversations in the past with poll workers, and they've made adjustments to things that are very easy to do without requiring consultation with anybody else, because it's not something major. So what are the views on if a poll worker or the polling place coordinator asks for how the survey went, or asks for like anything that could be adjusted really quickly that would improve accessibility in the moment?
This is Dessa. So anyone should feel free to jump in as well. Some of that is going to depend on state rules. So for example, in Michigan, as a challenger, we're really not supposed to give a lot of feedback the day of. In fact, we're supposed to just quietly observe. We can talk to the chairperson, but it's not meant to be advice giving time, which feels unfortunate. Because you're like, well, we're here. I can literally point to the thing and you could solve the problem. So it's important to check what the rules are for your state. What we have done is we follow up individually afterwards with very specific information about what we observed. And so not only did we put out the report with the Carter Center after the 2022 observation that has like the big picture view and kind of the aggregated data, we then reached out to each clerk with disaggregated data just about their jurisdiction that was very specific, so that they could plan to make necessary fixes in the future. And then one of the things that I thought was really smart is that Kenya then made a one-pager that showed common things that clerks can do on the day of to make positive changes, and things that don't cost any money that they can do. Because the thing that always comes up is, oh, we don't have money to fix that. Well, we can point out from jump that many of the things don't actually cost any money. They just require intentionality. And then, in terms of what kind of problems we tend to see, we can see problems that are game day decisions, like putting a trash can to prop open a door, versus infrastructure problems like having a place that doesn't have a ramp or elevator. And by breaking them, giving clerks in advance of elections information about these types of problems and these kind of categories, they can plan ahead better to fix. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to Stephen's question, but that's what comes to mind for me.
This is Stephen. I'll just say that was super helpful in referencing your own state laws around what you can and can't do around immediate fixes if someone does ask you about it. So thanks for that.
Thank you. I see Isra's hand up.
Hi.
Isra.
I don't know if anybody else had anything about this topic real quick. Because it's kind of related, but I was going to share this and then I was like, is it relevant? But so I vote in, I usually don't vote on the day of. I've always voted absentee because I'm working that day. But with early voting, I was able to go, and I, as gently as possible and as like least intimidating and as least like accusatory as possible, I thought, I tried to get the workers to allow me to use the voter assist terminal. And, there were so many things wrong with that experience, and it was just too much. And I have to follow up with Dessa to share it with her, but it was an you know what? We could talk offline about it, but as soon as I entered, first they looked at me physically, like up and down, that, I don't look like I need one. Secondly, they were making it difficult. They were just like, ugh, huffing and puffing. Then, I kept persisting. And so an average voter is probably not going to keep persisting, or might not know that they have the ability to, because they almost basically said no to me. And I was like, well, and then I elaborated and I said, I'm going to be volunteering in August and November. I really would love to experience this. And I want to be able to tell other voters how to use it. And I've never used it. Eventually, like they lowered their barriers a little bit. But then it took about 25 minutes, I think, or 30 minutes overall, just to use the voter access terminal. It was also facing the public. I asked them to turn it. They said, no, I mean, it'll print your ballot and you can just, and I'm like, no, you actually vote on the screen. And again, I'm trying to be mindful of not knowing too much or trying to like be giving them directives, but long story short, there was a lot of back and forth. I could hear commentary too, where it was like, "Oh, she's with an organization. She's probably audit. This is a secret thing. They're auditing us." And I'm like, "What? Why does this have to be a conspiracy?" And so there was just a lot of discomfort, and I think it was because their clerk might not be aware, or they're just not aware of all the nuances, and they had to ask this veteran person that usually does it for them on the day of election to come and do it. But even the clerk, when she came, she tried to mess with it. It wouldn't work. They gave me such a hard time to turn the machine. Then they put one of the other booth barriers to cover it, just to kind of makeshift it. But it was just like, it looks makeshifted, and you could easily just turn it around, but the wires were too short to fully turn the machine. And it was just a lot. So I want to throw out there too, and maybe you covered it earlier, and I apologize if I missed it, but I think having a component of like the voters in that jurisdiction advocating so that they can actually do the immediate thing, like Stephen was mentioning, and give kind of that advice to them, because I could push back, because that's my clerk's office.
Yep. This is Sarah B. So two things. First, some of the protection and advocacy agencies, many of them do these surveys already, but some of them have voter experience surveys where voters with disabilities are asked to share their experience, and they have a chance to audit the poll. So that is something, I don't know if it's something that is done in your state, but that's something that a lot of PNAs are doing to try to gather data. And then they use this to follow up on issues, because that's certainly a barrier that needs to be fixed. Poll worker training is one of the big barriers to voting accessibility. And to make a little plug for a different project I worked on with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is a government agency and Center for Civic Design. Last year, we designed a poll worker training. We did a report on the issues around poll worker training, specifically with accessible voting systems, to look at the issues around how frequently poll workers don't know how to use it. There's inconsistent training on how to assist voters with disabilities. They're asking inappropriate questions like about your disability, or they are creating more barriers to using it. So we created this report, and more importantly, a model training for election officials on how to appropriately train their poll workers to assist voters with disabilities so that they can vote privately and independently. They can plug in the information for their specific voting systems in their jurisdiction. And it gives all of this information about, how to set up the polling, set up the system so that it's not facing everyone, and where to stand if you're assisting a voter with a disability so that you're not looking over their shoulder and watching them vote, all of those things. So that's something that we're trying to put out there as a resource that people can take to their election officials and say, hey, why don't you incorporate this training? It's addressing some of the challenges that we have.
This is Dessa. Thank you, Sarah. And just to put a very fine point on this, you don't have to be disabled to use the voter assist terminal. They cannot ask you about your disability. They cannot be the judge of if you're eligible to use the machine or not, because guess what? All people are eligible to use the machine. So that was a mistaken attitude. And I think, there's a really important balance here. We know election officials are under a ton of pressure, scrutiny. They have to learn a lot to work for 1 or 2 days a year. So we want to have the right balance of critique when these kind of negative things happen and when access is denied as a result, and obviously really thank them for protecting our democracy and making sure that the voting is happening in a safe and an accurate way. So, it's super, what you just experienced, what you just shared, Isra, is like so familiar to so many of us with disabilities when we go to vote. And, really trying to strike that right balance of like, hey, I have rights too that are not being upheld here, or I'm getting shade for just trying to exercise my right to vote with the knowledge that they're trying to do a lot in one day, and it's really a lot, it's complicated. So not giving anyone a pass, but also just putting into context all the different laws that they're trying to remember. And they got training. They got like fire hose training. So thanks for sharing that. Any other questions from folks? Questions, feedback, thoughts? Okay. Well, you're going to hear from us. You're going to get a follow-up email with a lot of resources. We're really excited for you all to do audits in your communities. And we're actually going to be doing several more of these workshops over the next few months. So we have 2 more workshops just like this in April and June. And in May, we're doing a workshop that's just a deep dive 1-hour workshop into the questionnaire. So we talked a bit about the questionnaire today, but we're going to spend a whole hour on the questionnaire in May. So you will be getting an email about that opportunity as well. And we hope to see you there. And please tell your friends if they would be interested in joining us for any of the other Train the Trainers that are coming up. Thank you so much for your time. Take care out there. Happy voting.
You guys
Bye-bye.
are awesome. Thank you for everything, all the presenters.
Oh, thank you, Miss
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. This is Dessa. I think we just have